thing that's really interesting about looking at things is that you can look at anything. And that's what we do all day long. We just look at things. That's what humans do. And they draw conclusions from what they look at. But of course, there's other categories of looking where you are looking for something, or you're looking closely, or you're looking in a really quite a sophisticated way, which is when you go to an art gallery. And often what happens is that people muddle these things up and get confused about which one they can and can't do. And they think, oh, I can't do that because I'm in an art gallery, or I'd like to do that, but that's not what we're doing now. So the thing that's exciting about the show is that it asks questions about what exhibitions are. It allows people who go to what they may call an exhibition to think differently, to look in a different way, and probably to join it up with lots and lots of other very ordinary experiences that they have anyway, as well as very extraordinary experiences that they have, which they don't even realize are extraordinary, because you can test it really on children. When you're with children, children will always ask you things that are just devastating. They'll ask you huge questions about why are we here, what are we for, is the Earth a planet, etc., etc. So their inquiry is always creative, because they're inventing their own world. And as you get older, you get better behaved, or you just get narrower, and you stop asking a lot of those questions. And I think that Hans Ulrich has a strange knack of provoking people to ask questions or restate things which are really quite childlike. And if we're lucky, this Do It show will travel around all of this stuff. It'll make people slightly uneasy, it'll make them joyous, people will share a lot of things, it'll become very, very folkloric, people will talk about it, it'll become gossipy. You'll realize you heard something about it, but you don't quite know how you heard it, which of course is what living in a big city is always about. All these bits of stuff that you've half heard, things that you hear somebody talking about on the bus because they saw something on television. And there's a second part to all of this, which is that there's an idea that you're instructing people. And the great thing about people is that they don't do what they're told. We live in various codes, we try and behave more or less nicely to each other. Different cultures stand at different distances from each other. Different cultures talk faster or slower, or louder or quieter. And actually, the British, are pretty argumentative. You know, they like to ask a question about, well, why are we doing this, or what do we do? What is this for? Or I know I'm meant to do that, but it doesn't make any sense to me. And in fact, of course, it's not a British exhibition; it's a show in Manchester. But Hans Ulrich knows people all over the world, so really we're getting instructions or ideas from all over the world. And there's something that I like very much about the show, or even something I like very much about the idea of Do It, is that it's extremely infectious, because the moment that you hear about it, you think, oh, well, what would I do? And then you have a proposal of your own, and another one, and another one, and another one. In the way that ideas are infectious, you realize that perhaps there are only so many ideas, and we had them all already, but we need each other to remind ourselves that we had an idea. That's what it means to recognize something. So when you arrive in a city, if it's for the first time, you have a necessity really to find the meaning of the city. You don't really know that's what you're doing, but you're trying to find its core and its center, and how it sees itself. And all cities have this quality. It's part of their dynamic. So sometimes they have several centers, but they definitely have a thing called an edge that may, in modern cities, be many, many miles away from the centre. And I'm very interested in what that relationship is between the edge, the outside, and the inside, and the bit that we call the centre. And of course, the more the city is describing the state or the nation or playing to being the capital, the more likely it is that it's doing things about power and memorializing history, and might even be apologizing for history. It might equally be very hubristic, and perhaps we might think overly proud. But these things gather in certain places, and you can learn a hell of a lot about a city from them. One of the things I want to set up in the show in Manchester is the idea that we could do that with Manchester. It's not a city I know well, but I know it has a strong debate about itself, and it's very proud. And I really like the idea that Manchester could rethink, well, where is its centre? Or even, should its centre be somewhere else? And then, what are these emblems? What are the buildings that speak of being in the centre? What are the energies? And they change, 100 years ago we were building opera houses. Now we build art galleries. So cities have different forces running through them. If you have a terrible war, after the war you tend to apologise for it, and you put up lots of things, because you're sad about what happened. But maybe there is a way of, it's a rhetorical question. Would Manchester like to rethink whether its centre of gravity is somewhere other than where it is? And it's quite enjoyable for me because I'm not from there, so it's slightly mischievous. I'm a little bit of a troublemaker. I think the show is full of trouble, not in a bad way. I tend to be more creative, or I tend to be more imaginative if I compress the time in which I have to act to something quite tight. So I'm not like a procedural architect who's going through these stages and then I come to my conclusion. I'm somebody who thinks around some anxiety, some itch, and then when I have to make a decision, I'll do it. And I'm nearly always within about 10% of where I want to be. I don't mean that it's necessarily good, but it's the way I like to work. So I'm at the moment in exactly that space where I'm imagining the good citizens of Manchester, how they might respond to my request, and I'm looking for a form to do that in. So one of the forms, of course, is the opportunity to make a little film and go, would you please entertain this idea? So even getting the idea over that a city is something that you can balance, and if you cut it out, you could say, look, it obviously balances around here because this weighs down here and that weighs down here. It literally has a centre of gravity. And it could be that this will turn out to be one of those things where one just needs to reinforce where Manchester feels that it's got a centre, or maybe it's a place that's got multiple centres and people need to enjoy understanding that more. Or maybe they don't need to, but maybe they would enjoy doing that. And I suppose this is what happens if you're an amateur. I mean, I'm not trained in urbanism or architecture, but I really like cities. I think they're so extraordinarily familiar and strange. We invent them. They're not. There's no nature where we are. There's this river thing going past, but it's been told what to do 1,000 times, and it's going, okay, I'm going between these two walls, which are embankments. It's negotiating various things. We're really bossy. We plant trees where we like them. If we don't like them, we cut them down. So maybe the sky is our nature, but the thing we live in is really us. So maybe we're the nature. Maybe how we behave is the nature.
So it's interesting whether you use about bossy, because maybe people need to be a bit more bossy about how their city is.
Well, I think people should be very bossy about cities. I think you should care not you should care. It's normal to care. The complicated thing is how to express caring. I think what things look like, how they're made, where they're put, why they're where they are, should be a major school lesson. I think half a day a week should be devoted to why we behave, how we behave. Would release so much brilliant energy, because actually, why do we dress how we dress? Why do we eat what we eat? How do we eat? Where do we eat? Who with? In what circumstances? And it's only a little breaking of those rules that reminds you how codified it is. It's only seeing somebody in a swimsuit can be quite shocking, especially if they're not on the beach. But on the beach, it's already understood. You wear swimsuits. So all these little contradictions that we all live with, but we don't really share very much. It tends to feel like it's something that happens to us, not something that we make happen, when in fact we're the activators. I think that this is a sort of English schoolboy's reply, or English schoolboy's idea about how Do It can work. There's a very odd, almost passive space that used to involve reading the back of the cereal packet. Strangely intimate. You know, there's a box, it's got some writing on the back. It might even be personalised. It might say, dear breakfast person. And you're looking at this thing, and it used to tell you that you could do this or that or whatever. And you munch, read, munch, read. There's something very nice about that space. It's an interesting commercial space too, where a product can actually engage with the consumer, and the consumer can, in a sense, go back to the product. So that's why missing persons appear on American milk. So there's something about this kind of instruction which, for the greater part, we don't like. Although we'd be very pleased if somebody did that if there was a fire. He told us. So we have select avenues in which we'll do what we're told and where we won't do what we're told. But for artists, the thing that's most interesting is people being resourceful, because artists have to be resourceful, because artists have to invent themselves, because in some stupid way they don't fit in some way, so they have to invent a way to make themselves feel like they make sense. They have to make sense of the world. And in fact, of course, everyone is an artist. And by that I mean, talk to a child. You know, the child will just fill your head with brilliance. And you know, the more a society can maintain that quality of imaginative generosity and the pleasure of sharing things, and maybe the best pleasure of all, testing things, kind of saying something to somebody and watching the look on their face as they go, no, it's just terrible. You know, some ideas have to die, but other things become members of the Let's Club, you know, which is a very nice English expression where you say to somebody, let's, and you do something. I never worry too much about what people are called. It doesn't seem, you know, you need to meet people and find out who or what they are. So I'm not particularly worried about whether I'm an artist or an architect or a designer with a little d. When you make an exhibition, you work with contingency, you work with all sorts of confines, you know, the size of doorways, access, staircases, whatever. And actually I rather like all those constrictions. I like the feeling of arriving at something, and I often think that that's perhaps really what architecture should be, where you have a good feeling about the process of arriving, sort of processional sense. And maybe a cousin of that for me is being interested in surfaces. You know, we've got these things at the bottom of our bodies called feet. They stick out. For the most part, we try not to think about them. They put us in touch with the ground. actually the body is constantly recording the levels, unevenness, things we think of as nasty, things that we think of as pleasant, soft things, hard things, all of that. And I just thought that it would be so great if we could change people's bodily behaviour very, very simply and slightly remind them that we do that anyway. So when you go upstairs, you have a really powerful sense if you start thinking about it. I am moving my body upstairs. Much more interesting going up than coming down, I think, because gravity is working for you. So I thought I'll make a ramp which will be something that, because humans are like they are, they'll want to go up. So it's a kind of going place. And then when they've got up, they'll want to come down. It means that they'll be spotted because they'll be slightly higher in the space. So you set up different relationships of people to each other. And they're dynamic. And you can stop people in that process. You can leave things for them to pick up or things to read or whatever. So it's like mini architecture, and it's quite simply uneven, and you wouldn't really know what I've told you. You wouldn't really know what it was until you'd actually done it, because it's not the first thing you understand. You'll meet this, you meet an interruption in the space. You know, the old joke, sculpture is something that you bump into when you're looking at paintings. And there is a sort of history for me in this, which is that I love those photographs which you don't, the places don't exist anymore, but in cliche French photography, there's always people in pissoirs, talking to each other, and you see their legs below there's a sort of vanity panel where the rude bit isn't, and then there's a leg sticking out, and then there's a head up above, and there's lots of photography involving conversation. So all of this thing where we direct, it's sort of garden wall, garden fence, garden gate, all these spaces where there's questions of ownership and authority, the person who speaks to you from a higher position, always or waving up to somebody, all these things that we carry around. And I just wanted to, you know, the big gallery space needs a damn good talking to, because it's an uncompromising, it's not a cube, but it's a big piece of kit. And really what we want to get people to look at are rather, well, they're huge things, but they need to be encountered in a small way, because they actually quite typically are read off a piece of paper. So there's a sort of funny connection here between me and Peter, who really does think very, very smartly about books, paper, scale, hands, eyes set side by side, the way we read, and of course the funny thing is that even in the modernity of reading, the Kindle behaves in a surprisingly bookish way. Gorgeous to watch, much more fun to watch a Kindle reader than to be a Kindle reader. Love watching them. Click, new page appears. And definitely not just another bloody screen. There's something else implied.
So what are you hoping people to kind of feel when they go up the ramp? Are you expecting them to behave in any way, or are you expecting?
I think that a good word in exhibition making is, how do you detain people? Because the history of exhibitions is really processional. It's really you know, in a trad museum you have enfiladed rooms. You have room on room on room on room on room, with openings, and you go through and you go through and you go through. And if it works well, it's a kind of physicalized book. It might take you through the centuries, or take you through political attitudes to something, or whatever. And this is a modest test, but it's an opportunity to I think it'll make people reasonably self-conscious about being detained, which is rather different from what I call the monitor on the plinth, which to me is hilarious, But the monitor is a screen. To a lot of people it's a telly. The telly has a place at home, doesn't move around very much, although it's beginning to because people are taking it with them. But in an art gallery, let's get a plinth. Well, the plinth used to have really good meaning. There's something.
Peter Savills plinth. He's got
No, I want to value Peter's plinth. No, I'm not having a go at the plinth. I'm having a go at, wouldn't it be nice if people rethought what the plinth was? So in fact, I think I'm almost exactly saying that, Peter's made a sort of conversation about the plinth on which different things could happen. But the plinth is a place.
Are people going up on the plinth when they're going up your ramp? Are they on a little plinth basically?
Yeah, I would say that they are being plinths. I like plinthing people.
So they're being plinths.
Yeah, and that's why I said this question about power and authority. That's the history of sculpture, that there are, there was statuary, and the statuary, you looked up to the statuary. And we're vertical beings. That's the other thing, is that a huge amount of our daily energy is spent trying to not lie down, and certainly trying not to fall over. But lying down is pretty well a private activity, or a way of indicating that it's a condition of obeisance. So it can be a place of begging, it's a lesser place. And of course, gallery floors are always rather gorgeous. They have a certain regal implication, and we're living in a period where we want that to be regal for all. But we still like the look of a big gallery floor. But getting people to rise up off that gallery floor is important to me. And they're a bit nearer to God too. They get nearer to the ceiling. What's very nice is I realise I've got a lot of photographs of people plinthing themselves. And I think the almost perfect rule for nearly everything I ever photograph is that it doesn't know it's going to happen, and I don't know it's going to happen. So I'm not a spotter aircraft, and I'm not my photographs are not a project. I really love an encounter. I like the way that the world gives itself back to you. So there are quite a few pictures of people plinthing who actually probably are in pursuit of something else. They don't realise it. They're looking out on a boat, or climbing up to take a photograph because it's an vantage point. All that kind of stuff, which is very, very powerful in the history of sculpture. I think the thing that I can do in this is I can be slightly the fat controller. I can not exactly direct the way people go, but I can encourage some behaviours. And it's something that I've dealt with once before, which is using the barriers that you have at the airport. I made something at Tate Liverpool, which actually asked questions about how we move around. And of course, most of the time we just negotiate things. You don't go up and shout at a tree because it's in the way. You go round it and you sort of relate to it. I'm sure the tree notices. So all those physical ways we are with each other, I think, are really interesting. All that stuff about who opens the door and holds it open for the next person or not, how you pass somebody on the stairs. These are deeply wired things, and I would like all of that to be in the mix. One of the things about exhibition spaces is they become strangely habitual, and they become very habitual to their users. So regular museum goers become very conventional and quite conservative. Oh, look, they've moved my favourite so-and-so, it's not where it should be. So they get they get almost domestic about it, as if they'd walked into their kitchen and found the fridge had got exchanged for the cooker. When in fact a good museum should be doing that all the time. It should be asking questions about what are these things, because it's our job to be thinking about where we are now, how we behave towards each other, what was history. We were not there, we simply weren't there. So how do you get hold of that? And then how do you imagine the future, because you have some understanding of the past? So I'm not dictatorial, but I really like the idea that people will enter the space and it won't be the way they've seen it before, and they'll have to use their bodies much more than usual. I have a real sense of, it would be nice if it was, maybe we can do the shows somewhere else in the future and we can have it more like a gym, But all of that stuff which proposes physical change. And most of us do that every day. We don't hesitate to walk up and down stairs, go up and down a ladder, climb on a chair, change a light bulb. We don't, you don't question it. When you're in a museum, because I'm sure what it is that the museum comes from ideas of the civic good, sort of a cousin of the church, and there's a lot of things to do with how we behave. And we sort of correct ourselves and we tighten up in some way, when in fact one of the things a museum should do is to loosen you up and make you feel that you've been in a space that did ask you questions.